read a quote recently that said, I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but I'll get the gist of it, that part of the problem we have as humans when we're interacting with others is that we assume they are looking at things the way we are. We assume they see it the way we see it, right? They run it through the same kind of lens or analysis that we do. And it struck me because that's one of those quotes where, and I feel like I run into these a lot, where most people would hear something like that, or they would, somebody would say something like that to them, and they'd be like, "Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, like yeah, I knew that. That makes sense." But I'm not sure people understand fully the implication of it, right? What does it actually mean if that is true? And I think there's a couple implications to it that are really important, right? One is the fact that we are always consciously aware of that, right? We may understand it conceptually. We may be able to, if we were prompted with it, speak to it and consider it and maybe account for it. But in day-to-day life, kind of minute to minute, hour to hour, as we're living and interacting, I think we forget that far too often. We forget the fact that we are assuming they're looking at it just like us. And if you take that a step further, like what it actually means and the mechanics of it, right? I always like to go to kind of a first principles, not that this is necessarily first principles, but in that spirit, it's almost it's almost obvious and it's almost absolute. Meaning, when we're looking at a situation, whatever it might be, right? A social issue, a political issue, a family, a relationship issue, whatever it is, as we talk about, we do what we want to do, right? There's a calculation in our brain. We listen to that calculation. Whatever that calculation is, though, however the inputs to it, the weighting we put on the different inputs, the variables involved, etc., right? That's our calculation. When it's done and it spits out an answer, which is, okay, I view this thing this way, or here's my belief or my conclusion on this, we believe it's right. We believe we've done the work right. I've talked about this in another video. Like, almost by definition, when we come to a conclusion, we do it because we think it's right. We think we've thought about it the right way. If we thought we didn't, if we thought we were mistaken, if we thought we weren't thinking of it correctly, well, then we wouldn't have a conclusion. We wouldn't have a view. All right, so why do I say all that? Because you bring it back to this point of we assume people think, we assume people see it the way we do. Well, yeah, because we think we're seeing it right. So we assume, like, oh, this is the right way to look at it. They're going to look at it this way too. They must have used the same calculation, these same inputs, the same weighting because it's right. Right? Now, obviously, there are scenarios where we think somebody's just wrong and we say, well, they just don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're looking at, right? We run into that sometimes. But our starting point, I think, is almost always this idea that, yeah, we're looking at it the right way. So other people are seeing it this way too. And it's so complex and nuanced, that calculation, that some of the stuff is big and obvious, right? There's things that we can differ on, right? How you define certain terms, how you define racism, how do you define conservatism or capitalism, right? There's things like that we can kind of understand you might have different views on. But then there's simple things that we just assume people, like, oh yeah, they see it just like us, right? It could be, again, back to the racism point. There's somebody that could watch primetime TV shows or popular TV shows, and it's just obvious to them. Like, there's not a lot of black people on these shows, or there's not a lot of black main characters, or whatever it is, right? I'm making it up. And that's obvious to them. It's just a given. They don't even think about it. It's an assumption of theirs, that they just believe. Where somebody else sees it totally differently. They don't even notice that. They're not aware of it. And those are the ones that I think are really key to when you're having a conversation about that topic. You just assume that other person sees that too, right? It's obvious. You must see it. I see it and I'm seeing it the right way, so you must see it too. So it made me really think about that whole concept, and it gets back to what it often gets back to. We have to be cognizant. We have to be aware. We have to be aware of our thoughts. We have to be aware of our calculations. It's why I'm always wanting to go to that first principles. I always want to break down the calculation, understand the inputs, even the ones that we might be blind to, the ones that we're just assuming or taking for granted. But then you have to do that extra step and be open to the idea that somebody else is running a totally different calculation, right? We have to actively, consciously be aware in the moment, at all times, when it matters, right? When it's something important, if you're debating sports or something, maybe not as big of a deal. But we have to be actively aware and account for it in the moment when we're talking to somebody else. That, hey, they do not see it the way I do. They don't have the same assumptions. They don't run their calculation the same way, right? It's not enough to just understand it conceptually. We have to internalize it. We have to face it, and we have to actively account for it in everyday life.